Oh, and we're live. Well, actually, we're not live, so we're not live. Welcome to a special edition of Meeple Syrup Show with myself, Sen Fong Lim, and our special guest, Seth Jaffee. Seth, how's it going?
Good. How you doing, Sen?
Good. I'm doing really well. So what's going on in Arizona lately? You guys are, has RinCon just happened?
RinCon is in October, but we just last week had our first fundraiser event of the season of the
Oh,
year.
that's what it was. Okay.
Yeah, we do a couple of one-day fundraiser game day events, and it went really, really well. In fact, some of the people that came were telling me they thought it was the best one we've done yet. At one point, I counted 53 or so people in there at a time. We ended up making $310, which is not a lot, but we only charge $5 for the day, and a lot of people chip in a little extra for some raffle tickets.
Great.
But yeah, we had a really good time.
And RinCon is really just a local convention?
It's a local convention that 5 years ago, maybe, some people got together. I was among them, but I wasn't really on the board, and they started a convention here in town. A couple years later, the board everyone left town. They kind of disappeared, and so the convention just didn't happen one year. So I kind of thought that it was too bad to not have a local convention. I go to so many conventions; it'd be nice to have one local. And then once we had one and it didn't happen anymore, I thought that's unacceptable. So I picked up the mantle and got some friends together to help me out, and I have just been putting it on. Having zero experience running conventions, it was a bit of kind of jumping in the deep end, and I
Yeah.
hope I did a reasonable job getting it together. And over time, more and more people have sort of volunteered to help, and now I've got a really good, solid staff of people that help me out. And we do things like this event that we just did last week. We did a couple of those, and the main convention in October. Um,
Excellent. I keep hearing about it. For some reason, I know a lot of people in Arizona who make games. Why is that?
Because Arizona is not just hot, but also a hotbed of game design. I don't
It
know.
is. No, it really is.
Yeah, I
So,
can think of a handful of big name designers that are in
yeah,
the air.
which is great for you guys, right?
Yeah, and
Although,
publishers too. Yeah.
yeah, Michael is not really there anymore, is he? He's in,
Michael has moved to Utah.
right.
The rest of TMG is in Utah, but in Tucson there's Crash Games. There's in Phoenix there's Gamelin Games, and also Tori Neiman lives in Phoenix,
Hmm.
designer of Alien Frontiers. In Tucson you got your David Short, Michael Eskew, Dan Keltner, myself, kind of a lot of designer types in this area. Yeah, so it's a lot of stuff locally that is involved in the industry, I guess, more than
Hmm.
you might think for a random city in Nowheresville, Arizona.
Yeah. But we didn't really bring you here to talk about all of that. We brought you here today to talk about specifically development, um, because you are, and I don't know how many people know this, but you are one of the few people that I know of that is still, kind of primarily a developer. Um, you've touched your hands on many a good product, like, well, Scoville and our game Belfort, and you really helped turn, something that was good into something that's much better than it was. And development, I think, it's not a lost art, it's just kind of a hidden art, behind the scenes type of thing. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do when you help develop a game and what you've been thinking about lately in terms of development, because we talked about that off air a bit, and I was really interested where you were going with that. So let's start off with that.
Well, yeah, I am a designer, but I feel like I've always felt like I maybe stronger as a developer even than a designer. As you said, people who are familiar with the TMG line might recognize, well, my game Eminent Domain, but also the games that I've worked on quite a bit are Belfort, Kings of Air and Steam, Ground Floor. So most of the TMG big box line, those three in particular, I actually put a lot of work into, months and months of work. I don't know, ask the designers if they'd agree or not, but
It
some
was
might
a lot. It
argue.
was
But
a lot.
yeah, well, I mean, like in those cases, I feel like in a way I was sort of a co-designer with the designers.
Hmm.
Whereas in some of the other games, Scoville, I didn't do as much. I mean, I did some development, but mostly I was checking it out to make sure it didn't need changes, and I changed very little compared to the time and effort that went into some of the other games.
Hmm.
So there's large kind of spectrum of types of games, and what it's been it's kind of got me thinking lately about the difference between a designer and a developer, what each one really does, what the role is, and just the difference between you've got a end user, a player looking at a game, that's got the designer's name on the cover, and I'm kind of wondering how often that name on the cover really relates to the experience that they're getting out of the box. It's nice, it's great that we've got these designer games that have the designer's name on the box and people can shop by designer like they do with books, looking by author. But I'm wondering how often people get sort of tricked by that because the game in the box is largely the work of a developer as opposed to designer, or how often, that it's probably different designer to designer, and even within a single designer, publisher by publisher. Some publishers have put more work into development than others do, and some games need more work than others do, and things like that. So
Yeah.
I'm not really sure how I feel about it 100%, but I've been thinking about that a bit lately. I've started composing a blog post about this. I was talking to somebody, and they suggested, in fact, Captains of Industry just came out from Tasty Minstrel Games,
Hmm.
and it was designed by Michael Keller, and that was another one that I put quite a bit of work into. And I was talking to Michael Keller about that, and he suggested, well, I think I mentioned that I was thinking about the role of developer, and he offered to send like a testimonial type of thing, like a blurb, talking about his experience working with me. And I thought, hey, that's a good idea. Maybe I'll. And I was going to mention this before we started, but I was going to maybe talk to some of the other designers I've worked with, such as U&J,
For sure.
such as David Short, such as Scott Alms, and see if I could get similar, if they're interested in sending similar, just brief thoughts on what it was like to work with me in developing the game, and kind of use those quotes in my post that I'm working on.
Oh, for sure. I
So,
mean, I was talking about you last night, actually. I was talking about you with Ed Bryant of Toy Vault about the development process that we went through for Belfort, because we're working with Ed, who's helping us develop another game for Toy Vault. So he just wanted to know, how different was it? What's it like? And it was just a really interesting conversation, because you're right. There is a lot of stuff that goes unknown to most people. One of the games that I always think of, the first time I recognized that there was development was Rainer Knizia's Colossal Arena. Before it was Colossal Arena, it was Titan the Arena. Do you remember that? So that was an Avalon Hill game, right? And it was designed by Rainer Knizia. It was really just his horse racing mechanic, but it was developed by Don Greenwood, who did a lot of the work for Avalon Hill at the time. And it was actually all of Don Greenwood's stuff that I liked about the game, not Rainer Knizia's stuff. So it was really interesting that that's what kind of came out of that whole marriage of designer and developer, was this game that was somehow better than the original concept, yet Don didn't think of it himself, but he was able to kind of lend his touches to the game to make it a game that I enjoyed more than the original Knizia version of it, which is kind of cool.
right, and that's kind of what I was getting at before.
Hmm.
If you didn't know any of that story and you just picked up that game and it had Rainer Knizia's name on it, you would perhaps think, oh, I liked these things about this game. Let me go look at other Knizia games, and in doing so,
Most people did, most people do that.
and which is well and good. But then some of those people, if the things that you were liking about the one game were not the Knizia portion, then what happens when you find another Knizia game and it's not similar, right?
Right.
Like maybe that's the way it is. Maybe that's I don't know what there is to be done about that. I guess those who look closely at the back of the box and see it says game development by so and so, maybe that people might start to. I was actually curious. I've been curious, especially now that like Scott Alms and you guys are getting more games out there. I was curious to see if anybody was going to, I don't know, I'm not sure there's any way to measure this or for me to know about it, notice a pattern of things like Belfort and Kingsbury and Steam, developed by Seth Jaffee, and then like Tortuga and Tiny Epic, blah blah blah, which
Everything, Tiny
doesn't
Epic,
have
whatever.
that.
Yeah.
And what, if anything, people think about that? Like, some people won't care, some people might care, some people will like it, some people will not like it. But I'm wondering if it even comes up as something people notice.
I don't know if everybody notices that stuff, but I know I notice it when games get republished with the same title but have been redeveloped. After a game goes out of license and another company picks it up, and
Hmm.
they might spend a little more time tweaking the things that they didn't like about the I don't know, the Schmidt-Spiel version, and they take it and they manage to do something minorly different, but that makes it a much better game than the original version is. I think that's where development can really shine through.
Yeah.
But it's never really the developer that shines through. It's always the publisher.
Right, that's what I was going to say. When you see that, normally you think about it. Oh, that's being reproduced or republished by this publisher, and they've changed it. And there's not some publishers. The publisher is the person who does that. Other
Hmm.
publishers employ teams of people,
Hmm.
but it's not so much the name. The first thing I remember, the first time I remember seeing a developer's name being mentioned was on Dominion, and I thought it was almost odd at the time. It was 2008 when Dominion was about to come out, and everyone was saying Dominion by Donald X. Baccarino, developed by Dale Yu and Valerie
Yeah.
Putman. Like, I was like, really? You don't say, Puerto Rico, designed by Andreas Seyfarth and developed by somebody. Like, all these other games. Like, that was the first time I ever heard someone say, and by the way, developed by this, like mentioning it. And
Hmm.
I thought it was neat because at the time, I felt like I was an aspiring designer, but I was also felt I was good at development, and I kind of wanted to do that. And I was like, oh, that's great. I liked seeing the name of developer being brought attention to, and but it was unusual because I'd never heard it before. I've never seen that, and I wasn't the type to like look up that information. I didn't really know, who developed what game. Yes, the information is probably in the rule book or something, but I never looked at that
Oh.
before.
Yeah, I mean, I would always kind of look at it. I don't know why, but I've always sort of looked at, is there, who's the whole team behind this? I don't know if it's something that I've always done, but as soon as I started noticing it in old Avalon Hill games, it was something that I've always at least kept in the back of my mind. I'm really kind of big on giving credit where credit's due, so um, you know that whenever I talk about Belfort, I'll always talk about you, and I'll always talk about Josh, and I'll always talk about Michael and the whole team that kind of made that thing a reality. It's not just Jay and me. It's there's more people involved than it looks like, right? So, and I do think that developers deserve a lot of credit because they take the idea and they run past it. When Vlada Shvatil, for example, would say, and I might actually be able to say this as a quote from him. I can't remember exactly what he said, but about some of the games that he's gone past, that he's done with it. He's designed it, he's done, and he actually can't remember how the game works anymore because he's gone so far past it. But the developers can because they live and breathe that game more than he does now. And I think that's true about a lot of designers that we go from idea to idea to idea, and that's what keeps us, the I guess the pure designers, designing is the new ideas, the new ideas, the new ideas. And then there's people who are really good developers who are more the pit bulls, who kind of stick with it and say, no, I'm not leaving this project until it's perfect. And that's what I valued about you, Seth, personally, was because I'm definitely more of the new idea kind of guy, as you could probably tell from working with me. And there's definitely that kind of handling that needed to be done on a project the size of Belfort, that you kind of handled really well and guided us through the process and also put your spin on things, which is, I think, better than having to go it alone for new designers at that time. That was the very first big box game Jay and I did, and then also for a project of the kind of magnitude of something like Belfort, where it's a two-hour game that we want to make sure it's a good experience for the whole 2 hours. And so having somebody like you, with your background, was really helpful. Speaking of your background, how do you think that being an engineer helps you develop, or does it?
So that's an interesting question. Um, So engineering is a funny thing. It's like a science, but it's like the science of, in a way, it's like the science, like how can I be the most, well, the most efficient, but I'd like to say that how can I be the most lazy? Like I want to do the least amount of work and have it be the best possible thing, right? So it's like in a way it's sort of a generic process that applies to, you can apply it to like almost anything.
Hmm.
You know, in my job, in my engineering job, I'm designing houses, and you know, you want to make sure you're not using too much material, but also you're satisfying all the code requirements.
Right.
I mean, you could just build the house out of solid wood and no windows and anything like that, and it would stand up pretty good, right? But that's not the point. You want to be able to minimize cost, but you know, make sure you're getting enough effect out of that. And so, but you can apply that to, like I do like cookie cutter houses, but we could, you know, you could do that to a skyscraper, and this is even more important. You can
Hmm.
do it to you know, people do it to all kinds of things, and I can apply that to a game kind of the same way. It's like games have rules. You could write just a list of if-then statements if you want, and say if this happens, you can do this, or if this happens, this is the answer. But that's like the worst possible way to write a rule book, because you can't. No one's going to remember all the things. It's not very intuitive. It's not very easy to read, and it would take a giant manual. So what you want to do is you want to kind of minimize the rules, but maximize the effect of them. You want the important rules and the interesting game experience, the interesting decisions that it allows. You don't need extra rules, you know, if you can help it. So I try to, you know, apply some basic engineering philosophy to the rulebook or to the game, and I guess that, I don't know if that's related. Maybe that comes from, you know, being an engineer for a long time, or maybe I'm just that way. I'm really big on efficiency in general. I
Hmm.
really like efficiency games. I can be kind of good at them sometimes because I don't know, it just rings true. Like, oh, obviously I'd rather do this than this because it costs less and with the same effect or whatever.
Right. And
Um,
being the son of an engineer, I agree. That's exactly what you guys are about. No, but
so
that's a nice segue into what another thing we were talking about prior to going on air was the whole idea of rules and what your take on rules are. And you know from reading my rules that I write like a robot. What are your particular penchants when it comes to rules nowadays, the modern rule book? What should it look
yeah.
like?
Well, writing rules, probably anyone who's written some rules will tell you, and you've written rules, so you probably can
I
let me
can
know
tell you
if
that it sucks.
Yeah, I was going to say, rules writing sucks.
It
It
sucks.
really does. It's not easy. It's a pain in the butt, and for a couple of reasons. It had if the thing is, and what I'm learning, I've been kind of thinking about this a lot lately too, and I've also constructed or composed most of a blog post about this, based on my current thoughts on rules writing. Um, so let me go back. Uh, when I was an amateur designer, and I would hang out in the Board Game Designers Forum chat room,
BGDF. I was going to ask you about that later.
I you know, I would talk to people, and we would talk about, you know, we're all amateur designers mostly in there, and we would talk about our game ideas, rules, and sometimes we'd be talking about rulebook stuff. And the basic sort of consensus used to be, you want to write technical, you know, a rulebook like a technical manual. You want it to be like computer code. You want it to be like a robot. It needs to be concise. It needs to be precise. It needs to be. You don't want to have this. You don't want to say the same thing twice. Partly because if then you edit your rulebook and you edit it in one place and you forget to edit in the other place, then you've got a conflict. But for the same reason, you don't want to. You know, when you write computer code, you don't write the same code twice. You just
Right.
reference the last time.
Hmm.
So there's all these, like, I don't know, rules or whatever that I used to think this is how you write a rule book. The problem is that's not how people read rule books,
Haha.
and that's the big problem. And so, and it took me a long time to get over this fact. I'm like, well, they should read it that way because it's completely logical. But you can't force people to read something the way.
Seth, not everybody has an iron ring, buddy. Not everybody has an iron ring.
Yeah, so that's the thing, is you can't force people to read the rules a certain way or whatever, even, you know, as logical as you think it might be.
Hmm.
So what you got to do is you got to think about the user, and you got to make it easy for them to read. Not only easy, but like something they want to read and will understand and remember.
Right.
So I've kind of got some current thoughts on how to do that, and there's some other like niggling aspects too. I guess here I'll go through my
Yeah,
article, preview my article a little bit.
for sure.
Um, so it's called "Rules Writing is Hard." Tips for rules writing. So
Don't
um,
do it.
it
Just
starts out with what I just said about how I used to feel about rules writing, but so it has to be correct, but it has to be approachable.
mhm.
I have an analogy in my article here about your VCR. For those of you who are younger than me and don't know what a VCR was, it's like a DVR, only you had to tell it when to start and stop. It was a video cassette recorder, and no one knew. It was like famously, or it became a cliche that no one knew how to program their VCR to like set the clock because you had these big technical manuals, and either nobody wanted to read them or nobody could understand them. And of course, nobody. That's an exaggeration. I'm sure some people.
I set mine all the time.
Well, yeah. But there are other stereotypes involved too.
Yes.
Some of us who aren't Asian also couldn't set our VCRs. Now, I'm not racist, I swear.
I'm kidding. It's all good.
So, but for the same reason though, I mean, when something becomes cliche or stereotypical, it does so for a reason. It's not necessarily always true, but it's at least true sometimes, right?
Hmm.
For the same reason, you don't want your rulebook you don't want the people who can't set their VCR to like read your rulebook and then not be able to play your game, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
because
not
then they'll never have the experience that you want them to have, no matter what.
exactly. You have to be approachable. So my current thought on that, something to help rules be more approachable and help the reader sort of read, understand, and grok them, is I'm starting to write in second person. I'm as if I'm talking directly to the reader.
So
Like,
you,
for example, don't say each player takes. Say give each player this, that, and the other thing.
right?
Don't say on his or her turn the active player chooses blah blah blah. Say on your turn choose this. I feel like it simplifies the language. It becomes easier for the reader to follow, and it's more personal. Like if I were teaching the game in person, that's how I would talk to you. So if
Right.
I'm writing rules to you and you're reading them, it should I think it'll be successful if I could feel like I'm in the room talking to you.
Hmm.
So that's my current thought on that. I like the second person. Also, it's always been an issue, but now more than ever it comes up is second person helps with a problem that pops up quite a bit in rulebooks, as you hear people talk about, is stuff like gendered pronouns.
Yes.
And I've been kind of conflicted about that at the risk of sounding a bit like a jerk. I don't like. I never liked having to make the rules extra cumbersome and full of words because we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. You know what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
like saying things like the s/he or whatever. That's I can't stand that. That's not the way to go. Saying he or she is better, but like now you've got lots of words and it's difficult to read and understand. So if you start using second person, you can avoid some of that.
Right.
And of course, inclusiveness is important. I'm not saying we shouldn't be inclusive. I just like to find a better way to do it. And the other way that I approach that is in the examples. I try to have consistent examples through the rulebook using characters, specific people, named people. Like, I could use my friend Mandy, who's a playtester for me, or my friend Michael, who's a publisher and my buddy, right? Or the designer. I just finished working on a game called Steamworks. With Alex Churchill.
Mhm.
He was the designer. He's in near London. And we just went through his rulebook, and I went through all the examples, and instead of saying the red player or red or orange or whatever, I put names in, and then depending on the name, I used Alex's name, I used my own name, and my girlfriend was there, so I used her name. So when it says Michelle places her piece there, that makes sense.
Yeah.
When it says the blue player places her piece there and the red player places his piece there, it's not as easy to follow.
Hmm.
So Seth places his piece on Michelle's device, she gets 1 point. That's
Right.
easier to follow, right?
Yeah.
And it's inclusive, and it follows, and it makes sense, and it's easier to read.
Yeah, and
So
you can
those are
follow
my
from example to example as well, right? if you have a running theme, a running
Uh,
story through the rules, then Michelle is
yes.
always the same color, and Michelle is
Yes,
always
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Michelle's always playing the well. In this case, it was blue, although she usually plays green. I'm always playing the red, and actually, this was perhaps a mistake on my part. So Alex's rule book had red does this, yellow does this, and his red character he was doing the same thing, but he just red was a female character and it said she all the time, and I always play red. So the first thing I started doing was putting my name for red, but then I had to change all the she's to he's, and then I put Michelle's name for blue, and I had to change he's to she's, and I'm like, well, if I had been on the ball, I would have just made Michelle the red player, and then I wouldn't have had to change as much.
Oh well.
But hopefully I got them all.
Yep.
But that's the point is though that with second person and with specific examples, you can cover a lot of that stuff in a lot more readable fashion. I feel like.
Hmm.
So that's my preference on that.
Yeah. Who do you think writes the best rules? Or who do you think writes good rules?
Josh Capel writes awfully good rules, possibly the best I've seen.
Hmm.
We've gotten many compliments on the Belfort rulebook, and to his credit, to his credit, he does a great job, and as such, he gets, he often asks for and gets and deserves a rules editing credit on the rulebook. If you look at Belfort's rulebook, it says
Oh yeah,
game.
Josh is right there.
Yep. It says, game design by Jay and Sen, game development by Seth Jaffee. It says graphic design and rules editing, Josh Capel.
Yeah.
And it's a well-deserved credit. And the same thing on Kings of Steam, which has also been a well-received rulebook. He basically rewrites the rules to an extent, maybe 100% extent, and does a really good job sort of making them approachable and understandable. And so even if you're reading that rulebook and you don't 100% agree with how he's done it, it can't be argued that it isn't a good job because people love it. So
Yeah, I just heard Scoville. I haven't even opened my copy yet. I've been so busy. But somebody yesterday was just telling me at the cafe that Scoville's got a really good rule book as well, and that's another Joshy. That's another
Well, and
Joshy.
Josh, I mean, not only does he rewrite the rules in a good way, he's got a very good sensibility for things that I agree with completely, such as and not just for the rulebook, but for the design of the game, as far as two pieces that do different things shouldn't be the same size and shape. Like there shouldn't be circle token for both of two different things, right? Like that's like against the rules for Josh. Like if you have two different things, they're going to be different shapes because they do different, they serve different functions.
Yep.
And I agree with him. Well, I'll say 99.5%. I think there are cases where you could have like the same like size and shape token that has completely different iconography and art, doing different things. Like especially if it's not a major part of the game or whatever. But he's like, no, we're not doing that. Which
Another part.
he's just all the way.
Yeah.
All the way that way, which is useful. It helps learn the game when you're like, oh, what does this do? It's the same shape as this. Maybe they're connected, but they're not. It avoids that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But in rulebooks, though, I don't know, but I would guess that Josh would say the same thing. The same thing holds true for terminology in the rulebook. You don't want two different terms for the same thing.
Oh yeah, he'd say the same thing.
My next tip on my thing is word choice and consistency. If you use the same term for two different things or two different terms for the same thing, it's not doing anybody any favors. You're going to get confusion. You're going to have questions. It's going to be confusing.
Right.
In fact, you might go as far as to say you don't want similar terms. Like you don't. If I can think of an example, and I'm making this up, I can't think of a real example, but let's say you had something called a demand token and something else called a market demand token.
Yeah, that's just silly.
That's probably asking for trouble. Like I'm not even sure what that would mean, but maybe a demand token is something that you can cash in to take something from another player, whereas a market demand token is something that has something to do with the demand, the supply and demand of the market. They're completely different things in a game. They might, this is hypothetical. That would be the worst terminology to pick because people are going to get confused. So yeah, you don't want two different things with the same name or a very similar name, and you don't want to say. You don't want to refer to the same piece two different ways because people are going to get confused. Oh, you're talking about this other thing now. Oh, wait, it's the same thing? It's not going to come across, right? So that's a very important thing when you're writing rules is being consistent with your word choices. Another thing about consistency I've seen in rulebooks and I've wrestled with myself is capitalization and punctuation. Well, punctuation should be consistent, and you should use the rules of English if you're writing English.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But capitalization there's a very big temptation to capitalize things that aren't normally capitalized in English.
Yeah.
And because they're game terms, or because within the world of the game they're a proper noun. That's how I was thinking about it for a while. But my current thought is, especially after going through, and Dungeon Roll was a kind of a nightmare on this. I was probably my doing was the rules for Dungeon Roll. I went through them a bunch of times, and I tried to be consistent about what we're capitalizing and what we're not. And I tried to use the rule in my head that if it's a proper noun within the world of the game, then it's a proper noun and it gets capitalized. So something like a dragon face, on the dice have dragon faces or companion faces. So the D in dragon should be capitalized because it's a dragon face. It's not just a face. Well, etc. But there's so much text and so much in the rulebook and on the cards, and sometimes a companion is just a companion, but sometimes it's a companion token, and so the word companion is occasionally capitalized.
Yeah.
And it was a lot harder than I felt like it should have been, and I think I'm sure in some places it's inconsistent because somebody, because I missed a capital or whatever, or something got capitalized that shouldn't have, and ever since then, especially, I've been, I think maybe the thing to do is just use proper English rule capitalization and don't capitalize things like dragon face or companion. Okay.
One of the things that we've been talking about lately is bolding the first instance of the word, and then that
to kind of point out that it's a game term,
a special term, and then maybe it has maybe it calls back to an appendice in a bigger game or something, right. And then never doing anything special for it again, because you're right, it just gets ridiculous after a while. You see a whole page of just capitalized text, and you're going, well, I guess everything's special.
Well, and that's the other thing is reading something that has a capital letter every third word is annoying and difficult. Mm-hmm. And so you end up having these sentences, and to illustrate that in my blog post, I put where did I put it? It can be difficult and annoying to read sentences where every third word is capitalized, and I capitalized like half of those words. just to point out how, as reading the article, you're like, oh yeah, that is annoying.
It's awkward, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't work towards facilitating the reading of the rules and understanding of the rules.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so that's so my current thoughts on that is don't do it. And just to finish out this article, so proofreading should happen. You should have it proofread and not by you, because especially after you've proofread it once, if you've missed something, you're going to keep missing it probably.
Yep. I know that.
You know what you're trying to say, right? So you're going to be like, oh, of course that makes sense. If you've written it, I mean. So proofreading and getting other people to proofread it. Images. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. They're not just saying that, right?
No.
And organization. That's kind of a whole other section, I guess. I can hold off on that if you like.
The layout, right?
So I'm going to skip organization for a minute, but just what order you put stuff in. Mm-hmm. When I used to I always teach games, and I used to think about it more. I feel like I used to be better at it actually, but I've gotten some comments on in the past that I'm pretty good at teaching games, and I think the reason, if that's true, the reason is because I try to explain it in a way that makes sense, and in a way, and maybe this is related to that engineer discussion. To me, I'm like, well, of course you don't tell somebody the details of their term before they even know what they're trying to do or something, because it's not going to make any sense. But I've definitely witnessed rules teachings that don't make any sense because they're jumping around from topic to topic. They're talking about things before they don't give the student any sort of context or anything. So I think it's really important when you're teaching a game to teach in a particular order to kind of organize the thoughts so that it makes everything you say is going to make sense to the reader.
Yeah. So why don't we write our rules that way, right?
Exactly. The rulebook is an approximation of you teaching the game to someone. It's worse because they can't stop and ask you a question. So it should follow the best possible organization. And I feel like I just read an interview with Jay, and I think he went over this exact thing.
Yeah, he probably did.
And I had just earlier that day or the day before, I had written up my sort of list of my organization, and I looked at his to see if and I compared them to see if they matched. And for the most part, they did match.
Where were they different? Do you remember?
Well, they weren't really different. It's just, pardon me, I wasn't as specific. Like I said, game overview, including your ultimate goal and what you'll be doing each turn in pursuit of it. And to me, that included like how you win the game and you know what your ultimate, you know. But like I think he he had broken out those a little bit more specifically. So,
Yeah.
and,
He has to teach students how to do it, so
yeah.
in the game
So
design course.
So he was a little more specific than I was, and I showed this a preview of my article to a few people, and I incorporated a little bit of feedback. So now my list looks something like this, and you can tell me what you think.
Sure.
So start with a thematic overview, include your role as a player and your goal in the game. Like your goal in the game, like maybe in more of a thematic way. Then components and setup, and here's a trick I got from TMG developer Andy Van Zant, a friend of mine, who I've met. Oh, I met originally at like Protospiel probably. He in his rules he puts components and setup together. He doesn't have like a list of components and then later a setup section, which I used to like that. People would put the components, they'd picture each one, and then I'm reading setup and I can refer back to the components and I'm like, that's nice. I can see what it looks like and what they're talking about. Well, what's better than that? Why doesn't it show me a picture of the component and then immediately tell me what that component's for and what to do with it, so I don't have to reference it. I don't have to go back and forth.
Right.
And I think that's a neat idea, and it's worth looking into. So if you combine the components and setup, I feel like that might be easy to follow. Next is a game overview, including your ultimate goal and what you'll be doing each turn in pursuit of it. And in this case, I'm talking about more mechanically. Like, you know, your game in the thematic overview, you might say your goal is to become the best architect in the city. Whereas your thematic, your game-oriented goal is to get the most points by building buildings in each district or whatever.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, some game does that. I don't know.
Yeah. So and then what you'll be doing each turn. So in an effort to get the most points by winning the majorities, you're going to collect resources and spend them on buildings.
Right.
And then an outline of the game structure. So does this game go in rounds? In this game, there are 7 rounds. Each round, there's going to be an action phase first a placement phase and then an action phase. Every once in a while, there'll be a scoring round. Sort of an outline version. And then the following section is okay. Now that you know how the outline of the game. Oh, and you're gonna keep doing this outline, until some game end trigger happens, in this case 7 rounds, and then okay, well, what's a game turn look like, or a round, whatever the case may be. So in the case of Belfort, we're talking, okay, in any given round, first you have the calendar phase where we just count the round. Then we have the placement phase where you're going to place your workers in more detail, and of course then you have to go into detail for each step. And then finally, you have a game end. You have to talk about so I have game end and determining a winner. Maybe that's the same step. Maybe it isn't. Depends on the game, I guess. When does the game end? Some games end when a certain trigger happens. Some games end after the 7th or 8th round or whatever. Some games end when there's not enough of a certain resource left over. And then at that point, you determine a winner. So you get to detail what constitutes winning. The first player to get to 10 points, or the player with the most points, or the player with I don't know, the biggest collection of whatever. So those are my bullet points, and then I said basically in that order. You don't want to start with your game turn, because people won't understand what you mean by, oh, you take the wood that you got from your elf and you do this with it, when they don't know how you get wood and what an elf is, Yeah. So that's a mechanically, I think that's a really important thing about the rulebook is organizing it right.
Yeah, I agree. I think what we've been trying to do lately is trying to write it how we would teach somebody exactly what you're saying. Going to the point where we'll actually record ourselves teaching the game and then kind of writing that using that as a script to write the rules from sometimes. One of the other things we've been doing a lot lately is instead of writing rules out verbatim, is developing like player aids
Hmm.
first before we write any rules, um, so that we can iterate those faster. Than it's faster to do that than the rules. They actually take some skill to get everything on a card or whatever, on a player mat or whatever, and that that has proven really effective in getting the basics really kind of down pat. Rules writing is probably, unfortunately, the last thing that we do. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but definitely it's something we should put more time into, right? I think.
One thing that's I'll mention one thing that's bad about it that you might not have considered. Um, I'm not sure whether it's your own process, whether it's a good or bad thing to wait till
Yeah.
the end to get the rules down. But um, if you're in the process of working with the publisher and getting towards a deadline, so rules you have to write them and then they have to be edited and they have to be edited some more. Then they have to go to the layout guy and they got to lay it out. Then you got to look at it again. And in my opinion, you got to do some more editing because now that it's laid out, I can't always see all the edits I want to make until it's laid out.
Yeah.
Um, that takes time, and if you wait till the last minute, then it's always a rush.
Yes.
And doing things in a rush is never the best way.
Oh no.
So, um, I guess could I turn that into some sort of advice? My advice would be, sure, once you are pretty sure the rules are close to what you want, I would say get them down and get them down in a way that you like them, so that that process once you hit it is way easier and faster to go.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
because I mean, you're gonna hope you're gonna hit that process, right? You want that game to be signed and get published,
sure.
so get
Sure,
it done.
exactly. And as the guy that has to do the editing, it's very nice if the designer's rules are good to start with, rather than having to rewrite the entire document. I hate
Yeah.
writing, and I don't like to have to rewrite an entire document. So, and I've seen the spectrum from basically having to write the entire rules over again versus being able to just edit. Much like development versus design, I'm strong in development. I also, when I'm reading text, I can edit it. I can say, oh, this would be better if it's like this, a lot more easily and maybe better than if I had to write it from scratch.
Right.
So, do your publisher a favor and get the rules well written, before they have to start working on it.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, we do definitely write rules before we send them out.
Yeah, and that wasn't directed at you. I'm
Oh yeah,
saying
yeah, I know.
you.
You, the
Yeah, you
audience.
said. You better know. No,
So much better.
your rules, if I remember correctly, the Belfort rules were consistent and a good start. And I don't, it's to some extent it's going to be personal preference. I know that, for example, a friend of mine has a game that they're actually looking to get into a Kickstarter maybe next week, and he asked me to look at his rules, and I thought he's going to Kickstarter next week. I'm like, are you happy with these rules? Are these final rules? And he's like, I think they're good enough. And I'm like, I kind of don't. So I started rewriting them for him, and I started using some of my tricks. Like I put it all in second person, and I got halfway through, and he was looking at it. He's like, wow. He didn't expect me to. He wanted me to read it over, and make sure it made sense. He didn't expect me to start editing it and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So he said that he actually said I should charge for that service. I should offer to do that for money, right? And I'm like, yeah, that'd be great, except for I got plenty to do already. I don't
Yeah,
really
yeah.
want
You don't really
to
need
do
much
that.
more. If you don't,
But
especially if you don't like it, right? It's not the most fun thing
no,
to do.
yeah, and I certainly don't. I'm getting to like it a little more, or at least tolerate it a little more, because I'm doing it a lot lately. Just right this minute, I'm actually needing to write this is my escalation rulebook, and
Yeah.
I'm looking at what we can salvage to use for. This is my lazy engineer brain. What I can salvage to use for the Exotica rulebook, which is the next expansion that I'm just overdue on writing rules for. So that instead of writing from scratch, I'm seeing if we can utilize.
Oh, for
'Cause
sure.
it's the same format anyway. It's going to be similar in some respects.
Hmm.
So I'm hoping I can start with that. It's funny. I'm actually, before you called me up for this morning I was literally, I have a PDF of that, and I'm writing rules in the note feature of the
Yeah.
PDF instead of in Word doc. And so I'm just like, okay, well, replace this section with this, and it's probably a bad idea, but I'm giving that a shot. But yeah, so my friend he saw my edits and stuff, and he said, oh, he liked the second person, and he said he gave a shot at, like, I had only gotten like halfway through, and I had to
Hmm.
stop. So he said he went and gave a crack at turning the rest into like second person, and he said he was liking it better, and hopefully that'll help. Maybe I'm hoping his rules will be easier to read and easier to understand now next
Yeah.
week when he goes to Kickstarter.
Yeah, I mean, I that's the one thing. I mean, at the cafe, the biggest thing is that people don't want to learn from the rules. Why? Because they've had bad experiences by learning from the rules before, and they'd rather that, one of the teachers at the cafe actually teaches them verbally how to play the game, move some pieces around, shows them how to do it. And so I think rules now have to be that much better because there are so many other options for people's entertainment time and their money and really it's just actually time because I know lots
Yeah.
of people would rather play
Well,
board games
time and
but
effort, really. I think it's time and effort because
yeah.
it takes effort to open a rule book and read it. It's not just reading it. You got to read it, digest it, and then summarize it for your friends because they don't want you to just read it to them either.
Hmm.
So, I mean, it's kind of a lot of work to be I don't know if you are probably, I'm going to guess that you're probably the guy in your game group that does all the teaching. That has to, if you get a new game, I'm guessing are you the one that like has to read the rule book, learn the game, and then how to
Well, I
play?
like doing it anyway. But yes, you can tell by my player color actually. If you ask Scott Nicholson, yellow people who play
Oh, really?
yellow. Yeah, people who play yellow are the game explainers apparently. I don't know.
That's funny. I don't play yellow at all, but I'm usually that guy either because well, it's not so much that I have the games, although I sometimes do. I usually don't buy games, but because I know the games, I know
Yeah,
about them.
yeah.
I don't know if I've looked into them or I've researched them or whatever the reason. Or maybe because I'm more willing to, or I'm better at explaining them. I'm often
Yeah,
the one
maybe.
explaining the rules, and like you said, I kind of don't mind it. Depending on who I'm with and where I'm at, part of the reason I don't mind it is because I'm afraid someone else is going to do a bad job of explaining the game, and I want it to go well. But that's maybe I'm projecting there. But um, as the person with the burden of reading the rules, digesting the rules, and then telling other people the rules, you know how important it is that the rules make sense and are easy to read.
Yeah.
And I'm friends with a guy named Sebastian Bleasdale from London,
Hmm.
who is the designer of a couple games like Keyflower recently and On the Underground less recently. And in fact, he's in Kinezia's inner circle, and I think a number of the Kinezia games are largely him, like not just a playtester, but in his design group or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but anyway, I was talking to him about this rules article, and he pointed out that you really write rules for three audiences. You write rules for number one, the new player that's never played before.
Yeah.
I'd argue that's the main person, the main audience, because
Hmm.
that's the point. Your rule book is supposed to teach the game. But you're also writing rules for the person who has played and needs to look up specific information.
You're right.
That brings me to one more point about the rules: is that anything that's like how many cards do you have in your, how many cards do you deal out for each player count? Like if you hide that information in a paragraph, then shame on you, right?
Yes.
That is information that should be in a table or a margin or easily looked up because that's the kind of thing. I've played this game. I know how to play. I don't need the rules,
I
but it's
just
been
need
a
to know how
year and
many
I don't
cards we
remember if you
get.
need 4 cards or 5.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to find that information without having to read the whole rule book.
I need to do that in my own games. Seriously. That is the one thing that I always need to do is how many cards do we get?
Exactly.
Because I've changed it 10 times. I don't
Well,
remember what the official rule is.
yeah. In that case, yeah. If you that's definitely if you changed it and you don't remember which version is the right version, that's a perfect example. But even if you haven't designed the game, like I've played a
Yeah.
million games of Puerto Rico, but well, it's not true. I might have to look up how many colonists you use for each player count. I
Yeah, for
actually
each
don't
player
want
count,
to.
yes.
But if I did have to look it up, I don't want that buried in a paragraph. I want to find that very quickly. So
Hmm.
that means what? That means either put reminders. I've seen games put reminders in the margins. I love that
I love
because I don't
margins.
have to look
Yeah.
anywhere with the margins, and it's right there in bold and sticking out. Another thing is when you've got something like Hanabi. I just played Hanabi the other day with a couple friends, and we played a bunch of Hanabi, and we were sitting down to play with 4 players, and we're like, wait, is it 4 cards or 5 for 4 players?
Hmm.
And I actually didn't have the rulebook handy, so we looked it up online. But
Yeah.
if I had the rulebook handy, I expect that, and I think in that game, I think the rulebook has it like a bulleted list or something, or like it's
Yes.
broken out. It's very easy to find. Like, oh, you know,
For 4 players, use 5 cards.
For 4 players, you use 4 cards, each.
Yep.
And that's exactly what it needs to be. If you ever write, like I think I put the example, if you ever write a paragraph that says deal 5 cards each for 2 or 3 players and 4 cards each for 4 or 5 players, then I already hit you.
Yeah, Seth is gonna walk up to you at a convention and slap you.
Yeah, I'll say, oh, you're that person, right there. And then so you're while you're writing primarily for the new user, you're definitely also writing for the player referencing information. So
yes, and who's the third person?
What's that?
Who's the third person that you're writing for? You said
the third person you're writing for is the expert player who has encountered an edge case or is looking for a loophole, or has a buddy who's a rules lawyer and wants to try a thing, and you need to prove or disprove a certain thing, which means your rules have to cover all the cases.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be clear, concise, precise, cover all the cases. I was just playing a game last night. I was playing Tiny Epic Defenders, which actually I like that game quite a bit, considering I'm not a huge fan of solitaire by committee cooperative games.
Yeah.
I actually am enjoying Tiny Epic Defenders quite a bit. But we had a question, and I looked. Well, in the rulebook it didn't say, and I looked online. I found a unofficial FAQ, and it didn't actually say either. So we just made the best ruling we could. It had to do with actually one of the questions we had was in the FAQ, and it's what we expected, but we thought we'd check. And another one wasn't, so we just made the best ruling we could. And games like that, there are lots of different factions or cards that are special use that it's not easy. I mean, Eminence Domain is the same way. It's not easy to cover every case that might come up when you use this card with that card that's unusual or whatever. You didn't think about it. But yeah, that's the third person you're writing for, is the person who's going to push the limits of your game and find the boundaries, either by chance they happen to come up to a situation that is unusual, or because they're the kind of player that looks for loopholes every time.
Mm-hmm. Or the wording's a little awkward. Yeah.
So those are the three players that Sebastian mentioned, and I agree with him 100%. Addressing all three of those, if you write a rulebook that doesn't address all three of those, I think you're missing out.
So what do you think of the rulebooks like, say Mage Knight or Cross Masters or any ones like that have like the intro in the actual rules that walk you through the game? Legends of Andor did a great job of that.
I haven't actually read any of those rulebooks. I think I know what you mean by Legend of Andor. Space Alert did something similar, didn't it? Where it had some like beginner missions or whatever. And I don't know that I read the rules of that. However, when I learned Space Alert at BGGCon a couple years ago, my friend actually taught us by going through all those missions one at a time. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Having not read it, I'm not really sure if I've got an answer for you. I wonder if people are interested in sitting through it,
Yeah. Those are some of the cooler rule books that I've seen lately. Like Crossmasters actually puts little grids in the rules and says, okay, put your figure here and put your figure here, and this is how combat works.
Yeah, I saw a picture of that. That was neat. Yeah. It's probably really good as far as as an example goes. That's probably the best example because you're literally doing it. You're not just reading it, you're doing it. Yeah. I wonder how many people are really doing that, or if they're just reading it. I'm curious. I'm also curious whether people are interested in. So I can imagine that a player that's like, sure, this is great. Teach me the game bit by bit. But I can also imagine a player that's just like, either I just want to play the game. I don't want to play some miniature version that's going to teach me the rules, or a player that this actually came up in a game that's coming out soon from TMG, where the designers were worried about an intro level, so to speak, because they're afraid that a player might play the intro level, which is not the full game. They might not like it as much as they would have liked the full game, and then be like, and then not play it.
Never get to the full game.
Never actually play the full game. And we were trying to. We ended up. I think we ended up doing a good job with basically a couple of intro missions that stepped you up to the base game, and I think it'll be fine. And there'll be people that'll skip those because they've either played before or think they're able to just jump right in, and there'll be other players that maybe only play the intro mission and never play the full game. I'm not sure that's necessarily bad, although I can see the designer's concern.
Hmm.
where he wanted the game to be the game experience, the full game experience to be what the player gets, and if they get something less, they're not going to like it, and that's not what he was after. But it's kind of a new thing, this idea of uh, having these in board games, having this sort of um, intro or what do you say, like a
A
tutorial,
walkthrough almost, yeah.
like a video games. They've been having it forever, but
Hmm.
it's new. It's relatively new in board games to see this sort of tutorial. I think it's probably overall net good.
Hmm.
Um,
I
it,
would
it,
think so.
the reason that people are trying to use them, I think, in board games is because they work in video games.
Yeah.
I don't know that. I think in the end, I think it's probably a good thing. I just haven't had any experience with it personally, nor have I really heard anyone talk about having used it. Um,
Yeah. Well, like Andor will do Andor every mission that you go on in the first like maybe three adds a new element. So in the first mission there's no X, and then in the second mission X comes in but there's no Y, and the third mission you get X and Y but no Z, and then once you're in the full game you get X, Y, and Z in the game, right? So it just kind of
that's similar to the approach we took for the one that's coming out.
yeah.
Basically, adding a little bit of like complication. And we've only got like 3 training missions or something.
Mhm.
Um, well, two training missions, and then the third one is like the first level of the real game, which is not terribly difficult, but it's the full game now.
Right.
And the way we ended up settling to do it was we said, um, if you fail the first mission, or even if you pass the first mission, we say, if you feel like you need to, replay this as many times as you want, until you feel comfortable going on.
Right.
And then people who are like, okay, that was easy, let's go on, we'll just go on. And people who have it, found it challenging might play it again.
Mhm.
Or if you play the second mission and you fail, you might go back to the first mission and try again or something like that. I'm not sure how people are going to use that, but I think if they do, I think it's fun either way. So they'll
Yeah.
hopefully it'll be hopefully we'll catch more people that way. We'll versus not having those training missions at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it offers that accessibility that you're looking for without, making everybody do it, right? You don't have to do it if you don't want to. You can jump right to mission one,
Right.
and,
Yeah.
and that's fair enough, right? Just
Sure.
like in a video game, you don't have to do the training. You can just kind of start playing.